What's the first thing you liked about me?
I thought that you were quite brilliantly broken.
Shelley! Shelley!
When someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead.
And sometimes something so bad happens that the soul cannot rest. I'm gonna kill them. Every single one of them.
We have a problem. He came for us.
First impulse. Anger.
It's not anger, it's love.
You have no idea what hell awaits you. No, I do.
Brother, what's that?
The Crow came out last week to theaters with a dud, opening to $650,000 in previews and a $4.6 million opening weekend domestically, off a budget of $50 million. This was honestly the worst experience I've had in the cinema all year. It's dull, bland, slow, incoherent, completely misunderstands the essence, style, tone, and meaning of the 1989 comic book and 1994 film, and felt like an anti-movie. Director Rupert Sanders diverges from the original film in terms of gothic visuals and narrative structure. He follows little from the graphic novel, and fundamentally misunderstands the characters, the setting, and meaning of the source material, which are some of the many reasons the remake ultimately fails to substantiate its existence. The result is a movie that not only doesn't honor the source material, but also feels like a disservice to it. James O'Barr's 1989 graphic novel was a profoundly personal and cathartic work that delved into themes of grief, vengeance, and redemption. The comic emerged from the depths of O'Barr's own experiences with personal loss after his fiancée was hit by a drunk driver, and follows the story of Eric, who, along with his fiancée Shelley, is brutally murdered by a gang of criminals. After their deaths, Eric is resurrected by a mystical crow and returns to the living world, seeking vengeance against those who took their lives. The narrative is non-linear, interspersed with flashbacks that not only provide backstory, but also offer a stark contrast between his past happiness and present torment. Eric's journey is not just one of physical revenge, but also of internal struggle, as he copes with the unbearable weight of sorrow and anger. The crow itself symbolized this duality, acting as a guide for Eric's physical actions and a spiritual emblem of his undying love for Shelley. O'Barr's artwork had a raw, visceral quality, heavily influenced by gothic visual aesthetics and punk rock ethos. The use of stark black and white enhanced a grim tone, with shadows often swallowing the frames, reflecting the darkness that pervades Eric's world. This choice of style not only set the mood, but also emphasized the isolation and alienation that Eric felt. I loved how the panels were often chaotic, with a freeform layout that mirrored Eric's psychological turmoil, while the visuals were punctuated by poetry, song lyrics, and philosophical quotes, adding layers of meaning and providing insight into his mind.
Hold still.
Each one of these is a life you helped destroy.
No!
Directed by Alex Proyas, the 1994 adaptation is as famous for its aesthetic and emotional depth as it is for the real-life tragedy of Brandon Lee's death during its production. At its core, it was a tale of love and retribution, enveloped in the cloak of gothic supernaturalism. The story revolved around rock musician Eric Draven, who's brought back to life by a mystical crow 1 year after he and his fiancée Shelley are murdered the day before their wedding.
Bash, the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is.
Like the graphic novel, the structure is a blend of linear revenge plot points punctuated by flashbacks that fill in the backstory of Eric and Shelley's relationship, their dreams, and their violent demise. This revenge motif is interwoven with deeper explorations of love, loss, and justice. But Eric's supernatural abilities were less about the powers themselves and more about the impetus to correct a grave injustice.
You're the guy that murdered Tintin.
He was already dead. He died a year ago, the moment he touched her. They're all dead.
Proyas' direction brought a palpable gothic atmosphere, heavily influenced by the graphic novel's stark black and white artwork. The mise-en-scène was consistently draped in darkness, rain, and urban decay, reflecting the inner turmoil and grief of Eric. The setting, a corrupt, crime-ridden Detroit, is a character in itself, providing a backdrop that complements the film's theme of battling against a world steeped in violence and sorrow.
We killed your dad. There ain't no coming back. There ain't no coming back.
The cinematography by Dariusz Wolski played with deep shadows and stark contrasts that not only harken back to German expressionist cinema, but also reinforce the supernatural elements of the story. Brandon Lee's performance as Eric Draven was marked by a balance of melancholic depth and physical intensity. His portrayal was all the more heartbreaking given his untimely death, which infused his character with an eerie sense of finality and sorrow. The supporting cast, including Ernie Hudson as Sergeant Albrecht and Michael Wincott as the malevolent Top Dollar, also provided solid performances that anchored the film's fantastical elements in a more grounded realism.
When someone's dead, they can't come back, can they?
That's what I thought.
Eric didn't come back for me. He can't be my friend anymore because I'm alive.
Moreover, the soundtrack featuring bands like Nine Inch Nails and The Cure became iconic in its own right, capturing the early 90s alternative rock zeitgeist that complemented the movie's brooding atmosphere.
You're dealing with a supernatural situation, which is a man who has come back from the dead. And I think the thing that I enjoy most about this film is simply the questions that raises for me as an actor playing the part and for the audience who's going to see the film. If you died and a year had passed since the time that you had died, and during that year you have to assume that the people that you loved and the people who were in your life and loved you would have had a year now to grieve and come to some kind of terms with having lost you. And now suddenly you are given the chance to come back for 2 days. And there would be some fascinating questions that would confront you, like, wouldn't you want to tell somebody? But at the same time, wouldn't you feel a certain responsibility not to trammel in the lives of the people who have had a year now, like I said, to deal with that loss?
The Crow was more than a simple tale of revenge. It was a meditation on love, loss, redemption, and community healing, framed within a visually striking and thematically rich experience. This is why I was surprised to learn that they were remaking a movie that didn't need to be reimagined for a modern audience. Rupert Sanders might argue that his recent interpretation is not a remake per se, but another adaptation of James O'Barr's underground comic series. However, it strays so far from the source material that neither comic book fans nor lovers of the 1994 film are going to enjoy much about it. There is literally no resemblance here beyond the names of the two main characters. It introduces entirely new characters, such as a human guide who supplants the iconic Crow in guiding Eric, a Satan worshipper with powers, a band of previously unseen henchmen, and completely forgoes the dark setting for a sleek, generic city. In its attempt to explore themes of death, loss, and grief, it begins with a flashback featuring young Eric desperately trying to save his dying horse, which is entangled in a barbed wire fence. Doing his best, Eric injures his hands and fails, while a backdrop of neglect is painted by the image of his mother, drunk and unconscious within their home. All I'll say is that opening with the metaphor of a dead horse may not be the most auspicious start to a remake.
This does not bode well.
Transitioning to what is supposed to be contemporary Detroit, the narrative shifts to Shelley. Shelley is pulled into a web of criminality when her friend Zadie calls to warn her about an incriminating video that's put a target on their heads. Unfortunately, Zadie is then captured by criminals Marion and Lex. At the same time, Shelley's attempt to evade capture ends with her being detained by police who discover drugs in her purse. Marion and Lex deliver Zadie to their boss, crime lord Vincent Rogue, who's revealed to have made a pact with the devil. In a desperate bid to stave off damnation, he's been feeding the underworld with the souls of the innocent, and under his coercive influence, Zadie ends her life. From the onset, it becomes apparent that the film is a disjointed amalgamation of ideas that have accumulated and mutated throughout its lengthy 15-year development cycle, without a clear vision or any refinement. The result is a film that is bleak, lacking in creativity, and despite the inclusion of talented actors, ultimately exhausting to watch. So both Shelley and Eric find themselves in a bleak rehabilitation center, a setting that is supposed to become the cradle of their burgeoning relationship. While we know why Shelley is here, there's no scene explaining how Eric arrived there. Bill Skarsgård portrays Eric as a tattoo-covered emo who lives by the motto, "Cry now, cry later." I'm not joking, he says that.
They
While FKA Twigs' Shelley is equally burdened with sadness, and their love story ignites not out of any organic chemistry, but because the plot required it.
You feel like my person.
You feel like my person.
Eric, often the target of hostility from the other patients, finds solace in his drawings and is no longer a rock musician. Here he encounters Shelley, and a swift mutual attraction lacking any chemistry blossoms into deep affection that is very hard to buy.
Who's buying this?
Their connection is tested when Shelley's mother Sophia visits, accompanied by Marion and Lex. This forces the pair to escape and retreat to an apartment belonging to Shelley's friend, where their evening spirals into intimacy and drugs. In the original film, Eric and Shelley were beacons of light within a dark, corrupt city. Their love represented a rare bloom of goodness that was tragically extinguished. In stark contrast, this adaptation seems to blur the lines between the protagonists and the seedy underworld they inhabit, rendering Eric and Shelley as gritty as the bad guys.
You're missing the point.
I get that the extended introduction aimed to deepen our connection to Shelley and Eric. However, this lengthy setup merely layered additional trauma onto a story fundamentally rooted in it. Meanwhile, we learn the criminal underworld is stirring. Milch, a corrupt detective, interrupts Rogue as he observes a piano prodigy to deliver bad news. Zadie's body has been discovered. This propels Rogue and his men into a frantic search for the incriminating video that Shelley possessed. You might think the young musician under Rogue's mentorship will have a prominent role, as she's introduced with significant build-up, but no, she literally vanishes midway through the film. In terms of setting, whereas the original existed in a stylized realm of perpetually rainy nights, this film is set in a world that resembles a mundane reality. It was filmed in the Czech Republic, and due to the predominantly European cast, the setting and characters don't convincingly represent Detroit. As Eric and Shelley's relationship deepens, they spend time with their friends and enjoy outings together. This would have worked if they'd met before Rogue was after her, but it doesn't make sense given someone was actively trying to kill her. And at no point does Shelley let Eric know what happened to her friend Zadie, the type of people that were after her, or how much danger they were actually in. Instead, she says laughable dialogue like,
If I'm ever hard to love, try to love me harder.
You serious?
The movie effectively hits pause so that it can force their relationship and tell us that they're in love, but you can never get past the fact that they're practically strangers on their first few dates. As they party together, Shelley's friend Dorm urgently warns them that Rogue's henchmen are after her. Unfortunately, their attempt to seek refuge at Eric's apartment turns dire as they're ambushed by Lex and his gang. In a brutal confrontation, the pair are suffocated to death. Emerging from a lake, Eric then finds himself in a derelict train yard where he encounters a spirit named Kronos. So Kronos tells Eric that he's trapped in a form of limbo, unable to find peace until he avenges the injustice that befell him. The original Eric didn't need to be told what his objective was. He was murdered and wanted revenge, so this heavy-handed exposition from Kronos, a character not in the comics I might add, wasn't necessary, and all the symbolism is just thrown out the window. Skeptical, Eric dismisses the notion until an abrupt push from Kronos awakens him back in his apartment. There he's confronted by Milch, who shoots him in the chest. With his wound healing, he manages to kill the cop and transform into Gothic. Haunted by visions of Shelley, Gothic finds himself back at the train yard, where Kronos explains the grim reality. Both he and Shelley are deceased, yet there exists a path to resurrection.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
The core of The Crow was James O'Barr's cathartic processing of personal tragedy, which lent authenticity and depth to Eric's quest for vengeance. In contrast, the remake diverts from a profound exploration of grief to a less meaningful storyline where Gothwic's primary objective is to magically resurrect Shelley. And while we see a crow flying around Gothwick, it has no connection to him like it did in the original, where it functioned as his eyes and a symbolic guide. After arming himself with a gun, he interrogates Shelley's mother Sophia, who's in denial about her daughter's murder. Despite her disbelief, he resolves to exterminate those accountable for Shelley's demise, but neglects to begin with her mother, who it's revealed had sold her daughter's soul to Rogue for success. One of the many problems with Eric here is that he lacks a discernible character arc, making it difficult for the audience to engage with his emotional journey, because he doesn't have one.
I've come across a lot of psychos, but none as f***ing boring as you. I mean, you are a real boring
Rather than developing as a character, Gothic merely reacts to events in a way that mechanically sets up the next plot point. His portrayal is essentially a series of reactions with one emotional baseline, sad emo.
I'm so sad, leave me alone!
Bill Skarsgård's performance, typically compelling, is also unusually difficult to watch in this role. The dialogue, which proves challenging for the entire cast, does him no favours, accentuating a lack of charisma that seems to embody the film's overall joylessness.
And yeah, it was very important for the movie that Twigs and I would have chemistry and get along, and we did so on screen and off screen, I think. But the whole cast is fantastic, and it was a pleasure working with Danny as well. Houston.
So Gothwic's relentless pursuit leads him to killing Lex and going after Marion, who barely survives with her life. Meanwhile, Rogue visits Sophia, who expresses regret and laments that she should have been the one to die. In response, he whispers in her ear, compelling her to leap out the window. In his quest for answers, Gothwic finds Dawn, who reveals their past interactions with Rogue. This leads him to a shocking video of Rogue coercing Shelley into fatally stabbing another woman, an act that deeply disturbs him. He's then ambushed by Rogue's henchmen, who've all been sent to capture him. Turns out the immortal Rogue wants to use Gothwic to become immortal.
Okay.
In the ensuing conflict, Gothwic is critically injured by a shotgun blast. He then finds himself back at the Limbo Station, where Kronos informs him that his faltering belief in Shelley's purity has weakened him. Now, while she might have been manipulated into committing murder, she wasn't entirely innocent, and this just felt like Gothwic as being gaslit. And so, he makes a request to save her soul by sacrificing his own chance at life. Returning to the apartment, he exacts vengeance on the goons. In the aftermath, he discovers a text on Wickham's phone from Marion, detailing their whereabouts at the opera. Armed with a sword, he makes a dramatic entrance, dispatching Rogue's men with brutality. He then finds Marion, who, now regretful of her past actions, informs him that Rogue was hiding at his mansion. Despite her apparent remorse, he shows her no mercy.
Look, Mother is the name for God on the lips and hearts of all children. Your daughter is out there on the streets waiting for you.
Unlike the original Crow, who did his best to heal his community by giving those who had lost their way a second chance at life, the Crow here has no compassion. The final confrontation unfolds with Rogue stabbing him, attempting to absorb his blood. However, Gothwic catapults both of them into limbo. There, he unleashes his fury on Rogue, who ultimately gets dragged into the underworld by vengeful spirits. In the aftermath, Shelley's soul emerges from the water. Gothwic then declares his undying love, and she's resurrected beside his lifeless body at the start of the movie, with all notion of time going out the window.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
The 1994 film not only captivated with its gothic aesthetic and amazing soundtrack, but also maintained a genuine sense of warmth and community. Brandon Lee's portrayal of Eric conveyed a deep connection to a community of outcasts. His resurrection was a crusade not just for personal vengeance, but for an entire community that had shaped him. In sharp contrast, this adaptation lacks this depth and dimensionality, functioning purely as a revenge movie. The result is a flat, uninspired rendition that never truly takes flight, but rather descends into mediocrity, lacking any substance. It's like the McDonald's and Hot Topic of adaptations.
Ugh, Stan, knock it off! But it's just crap!
The pacing is sluggish, the stylistic choices are unmemorable, and overall, it fails to capture the spirit or excitement of its predecessor, rendering it a lifeless addition to the franchise. Sanders may claim to be offering a new take on The Crow, but this version suffers from a lack of style, a dull storyline, and a particularly lackluster performance by FKA Twigs as Shelley. Even Bill Skarsgård, whose talent for portraying deeply complex characters is well established, struggles to extract any emotional truth from this role. And when it comes to Danny Huston's Rogue, he comes across as one-dimensional and lacks the intimidating aura that Michael Wincott's Top Dollar embodied in the first film. For a narrative fundamentally rooted in the elemental themes of love, death, and revenge, it fails to forge a meaningful connection with the audience, resulting in a wearisome and soulless viewing experience. The absence of a compelling soundtrack does little to energize the pace, which drags as Gothwic frequently returns to limbo. Momentum only builds towards the end when he fully commits to his quest for vengeance, but by then, re-engaging with the film becomes a challenge. Until this point, his encounters are marked by awkward confrontations, where he relies heavily on his immortality to scrape through. Watching Eric consistently overpowered and beaten becomes monotonous quickly. It takes roughly 45 minutes to reach the murder that sets the plot in motion, with Gothic spending an additional 40 minutes coming to terms with his resurrection before he begins his spree of vengeance. It has so little connection to Eric Draven that I don't understand why they didn't just use another iteration of The Crow, given how there are numerous characters that take up the mantle. The direction leaves one questioning its intended audience. It lacks the edgy appeal that might attract a younger demographic, it doesn't provide the nostalgic satisfaction that might appeal to fans of the original, and it fails to offer any substance to pull in a broader audience.
You were given the power of a god, but you're running out of time to save her.
Moreover, The Crow delves excessively into explaining its supernatural aspects, stripping away much of the original story's mystique. This over-explanation, coupled with the unconvincing portrayal of Eric and Shelley's passion, would seem more circumstantial than heartfelt, result in a story that struggles to resonate on an emotional level, leaving us disconnected from the central characters and their plight. It neglects key aspects that define the original narrative: the horror elements, the Halloween motif, the random brutal murders, and the subtle social commentary, all of which are sidelined. It not only fails to capture the essence of O'Barr's original graphic novel, it actively seems to avoid it, almost as if embarrassed by its own foundation. It's a film that exists without presence, soul, or self-awareness, and honestly, if I was you, I would just avoid it.
Where? You like that?